Hello, hello, ahoy hoy, how's your hammer hanging? Welcome to a very different video from what I normally record. I have said in the past that I'd like to do more than just gaming videos, but to be honest I didn't expect this one to be the first of those. I don't believe I've ever said it in the past, but one of my hobbies is to collect reproductions of historical weapons. Swords, knives, daggers, polearms. I have a bow and some arrows as well, but I don't see myself recording a video of those anytime soon, unless it's requested, in which case I'll see what I can do. I've been collecting these reproductions for around 10 years now. I believe I started at the end of 2011 or the beginning of 2012. I've amassed a modest collection, depending upon who you might ask. I have somewhere in the region of 30 to 40 items, which some would say is modest, some would say is huge, and some would say is tiny. It varies from person to person. Unfortunately, most of the items I've bought over the years came from one particular site that I won't name and shame, but as it turns out, it is not a very reputable site. I didn't realise this initially as a rank amateur, and in my naivety I ended up using the site a lot longer than I should have done, about 7 years longer. The overwhelming majority of items sold there are of a very low quality. Even the more expensive pieces are basically just overpriced junk, with the odd, very rare exception. As a result of my slow realisation, I now possess quite a number of low quality pieces. For all this time since buying them, they've basically just been gathering dust, and I've been racking my brains trying to think what to do with them. Recently, I've had the idea to try modifying them and customising them in order to try and make them both unique and functional. It would be nice if I could do that, to make them something more than what they are at the moment, which, quite frankly, is a waste of space. So, I decided to start with this rapier, and I'll try to get a before image up on screen for you now, so you can see what the sword looked like before I began modifications. Unfortunately, the image quality isn't going to be great. I'm not especially good at photography, or Photoshop for that matter, but it should still serve to give you an idea of what I started with, and the progress I've made, therefore. This type of rapier is commonly referred to as a swept hilt rapier, and you can see why just by looking at the sweeping sections of that complex guard. This particular rapier is of a questionable origin in terms of manufacturer. I've seen a very, very similar rapier on the Cult of Athena website, produced by a company called DPK. The specifications that they give include a 100cm EN45 blade, blue tinted hilt, chape and locket, wood grip with a blackened brass wire wrap, and a weight of 1.46 kilograms. The rapier that I have right here has some differences. The sword had a blackened hilt, chape and locket before I started modifications rather than blue tinted, which you might be able to see in the picture. It's a little hard to say. The wire wrap might not be brass. I'm not sure how well it's going to come up on this camera, particularly with suboptimal lighting. I don't really have many options in that matter, since the electrical wiring in this place is not great, quite faulty actually, so I'm kind of limited in the kind of lighting I can work with. Even so, you might be able to see that this wire looks too orange to be brass, which is normally a yellowish, almost golden colour. This looks more like copper. And also, that's not wood inside. It is solid steel. Some form of mild steel, I should imagine. A solid piece of steel with a steel collar, wrapped with blackened copper wire, which results in the grip having quite a bit of heft to it. The blade is 100cm in length, but it being made from EN45 is up for debate. Why, you might ask? Well, bear with me and I'll try my best to explain. EN45 is a high carbon alloy steel. It contains 0.64% carbon, 1% manganese, 2.2% silicon, with low levels of chromium, nickel and molybdenum, and trace amounts of phosphorus and sulfur. I believe there are minute quantities of other impurities as well, but I'm not quite sure what they are, and I'm not particularly interested in going into detail of those anyway. It can typically be hardened to a Rockwell hardness of 48 to 50 HRC, which is kind of low compared to what I usually see in steels listed as high carbon. I'm used to seeing around 55 to 58 HRC in high carbon steels. That being said, I'm not an expert, and nor do I claim to be. This is just from personal experience. And to be fair, the steels that I see that kind of hardness on are steels like 1075, 1080, 1095, so you would normally expect higher hardness on those anyway. As a result of its lower hardness, EN45 does not have particularly good edge retention, though it is fairly easy to sharpen. That's basically the trade-off with edge retention. The higher the edge retention, the harder it is to sharpen. EN45 has quite high wear resistance due to the high carbon, manganese and silicon content, making it quite a tough steel. From what I've researched, EN45's chromium content of 0.4% means that it has low corrosion resistance. Since I'm not well versed in metallurgy or blacksmithing or whatever, I'm unable to confirm or deny this for myself. If it's true, however, then it could potentially confirm my suspicion that this rapier here is not made from EN45. I've had this sword for near enough 8 years now. I've never cleaned it, I've never oiled it, and I've taken it out of the sheath several times over the years for quite extended durations for various purposes. I also live very close to the sea, almost a literal stone's throw away, so there's quite a lot of salt in the air around here. Despite that, this rapier has only ever had very minor surface rust, exclusively on the ricasso at that. Since the complex guard prevented the ricasso from being protected by the sheath, it spent the last 8 years exposed to the air, so that would explain why it rusted while the rest of the blade remained relatively clean. Meanwhile, other newer and better maintained items I own need to have rust treatment every 2 to 3 months. One sword in particular springs to mind that I've only had for about 4 years now. I'm not sure what it's made of. The site I got it from listed it as damask steel, which is a bit of a misnomer, it's pattern welded steel, but the site never specified what steels were used. Evidently they had terrible corrosion resistance, as I have to treat the blade for rust every 2 months, even with oiling. That said, I recently tried applying Renaissance wax, so hopefully that will work out better. It seems to be doing better, but it's still just a little bit too soon to be 100% certain. As a result of this disparity in rust development, I suspect that the blade of this rapier is probably made from some form of stainless steel. Given the price I paid for it, I don't think it's likely to be something of the 440 series of stainless steels. Those typically have a higher hardness than EN45 anyway. With that point in mind, I suspect that this rapier may be made from 420 HC stainless steel, which possesses similar hardness while boasting greater corrosion resistance. I could be wrong, of course. I have no realistic way of knowing this with the tools and knowledge, or lack thereof on that latter part, to hand. Another disparity between this rapier and the D-Pica piece is the weight. This rapier weighs 2.5 kilograms. I will say that again. This rapier weighs 2.5 kilograms. That's pretty damn obese for a rapier. It's more than a kilo heavier than D-Pica's version, and even that is kind of chunky for rapiers, which can weigh less than a kilogram depending upon the specific style. I've seen simple cut-hilted rapiers for as little as 650 grams, and even seen rapiers with more complex guards for around 850 grams. I'm not quite sure how that works out, so I haven't really looked into it, but I would assume a thinner and narrower blade, thinner guard, much thinner pommel, and generally lighter materials all around. At any rate, it's these discrepancies that lead me to believe that this rapier isn't a D-Pica piece, but rather a cheaper imitation. A knockoff, basically. Which says a lot, since D-Pica are already a budget line. So this would basically be a budget version of a budget piece. Yeah. Anyway, the severe excess in weight and the lack of adequate weight balance are the main reasons I started modifying this rapier ahead of other pieces I own. Some of my items are really easy to work on, requiring only sharpening or a new sheath, but this rapier has been bugging the hell out of me, especially once I started to become more enlightened on the subject of sword reproductions. So, what have I done, and what am I going to do? First and foremost, as you can see, I started off by simplifying the guard. I've removed essentially all of the sweeping sections, thereby shaving off a few hundred grams in the process. I've yet to reweigh the sword since I started modifying it, but I think it's safe to say that 300 to 400 grams have been removed, possibly as much as 500 grams. In the course of this, I encountered a pretty serious amount of rust underneath all the blackening. I'm not sure what the guard is made of, but boy did it get rusty. Not just surface rust either. In some cases it went right down to the core, which is quite worrying. What remains of the guard appears to be okay though. There's no surface rust that I can see, and hopefully there's none under the surface either. I've removed the frankly cheap blackening from the chape and locket to give a much cleaner look. There's some tiny patches that still remain, and there's also some dimples and imperfections, but I actually like those. They create a natural handmade effect rather than having them appear to have been made by a machine. Again, I don't think the camera will pick this up, but just beneath this small sphere here on the locket, I've gone over a rough patch with silver paint, and same again under the lip of the chape. Also, in these grooves on the chape and the locket, I've added some metallic bronze in to try and make those grooves stand out a bit more and to give a little more character. I don't think it's going to come out too clearly on the camera though. The camera is not especially great, but it will suffice for now. I may replace it in February or thereabouts. I've also removed most of the blackening on the guard, though as you can see there are still some patches that prove to be a bit more stubborn, but I can deal with those at a later date. So far the guard has been reduced to a simple D section here that can kind of protect the fingers, while on the opposite side there is a small spike. Theoretically this could be useful for Mordhau, the murder stroke. Not that I actually plan on using it in that manner, though I may test it out on some coconuts or something like that. I would like to go to town on a zombie head from Zombie Go Boom, but those are freaking expensive for something you're just going to break. As I recall, they're like $150 just for the head, and shipping from America can run up to $120. Spending $270 on something I'm just going to smash in a matter of minutes, yeah, it's a lot, and I just don't have that kind of disposable income. Next on my to-do list is to finish tidying up the guard. There are some rough bits I want to take care of, particularly here and another bit here, but mostly it's this bit. There was actually a little wedge of steel that pops out from the guard, and I'm not sure why. I've glued that piece back in, but it doesn't sit flush, so I want to try and file it down nice and smooth. And same over here, there's a couple of blobs of dry glue that I want to buff away as well. Then I want to bevel the inner edge of the D section just here, because I've noticed that when I grip the sword, my fingers will occasionally knock against the guard, and bashing your fingers into a 90-degree corner isn't exactly fun. Likewise, I want to slim down this little knobbly bit here. While gripping the sword, my little finger tends to cram up against this bit, which also isn't particularly pleasant. So if I can slim it down, that should solve the problem. Once that's done, I can then finish removing the blackening on the guard. I might be able to get away with just using Flitz polish to remove the last of it, but if need be, I also have some fine steel wool and fine grit sandpaper to hand as well, so one way or another, it's coming off. From there, things get a bit more complicated, because I want to move the guard higher up the blade, up to the top of the castle here, where it starts to widen out. Excuse the fact that the blade is wrapped in tape, that's just to protect the blade from damage. Moving the guard up will of course affect the balance, but that's why I'm doing it, because the balance at the moment is not at all ideal for good point control and therefore accurate thrusts. So I intend to fix the balance by moving the guard up, and in order to do that I will need to widen this slot here. Don't need to widen the long edges of the slots, just the short edges, and even then not by much. Maybe half a millimetre on each short side should be enough to slide the guard up and seat it against the top of the ricasso. The hard part comes next, as I'm going to need to extend the thread. What I have at the moment is just too short to accommodate the moving of the guard. I have the tools necessary to cut the thread, but there's a problem to tackle first: the shape of the tang. It widens out as it goes towards the ricasso. I'll need to grind that down to the same shape and thickness as the threaded portion. The problem here is that I don't have any power tools or machinery, just hand tools. So that's going to be fun, trying to get the tang right dimensions to be cut using just hand tools. But I reckon I can do it. It won't be perfectly neat, but I should still be able to get it close enough. I don't think I need to extend the thread far, though, maybe just 8 centimetres or thereabouts. Once that's done, I can move the guard up and cut off the excess thread. Speaking of the guard, there was something I missed earlier, so I'll go over it now. I want to file in a groove around about here to make it more comfortable for me to place a finger over the guard for better point control. I'll need to figure out exactly where I want the groove to go first, of course, but that's not a big deal. Back to the blade. After I've moved the guard up, I'm probably still going to have to shorten the blade somewhat to reduce weight and to improve balance, which is also going to be fun without power tools. I don't even have a vice or a clamp or anything to hold in place. Well, I suppose I can make some kind of makeshift clamp, but even so, it's going to end up a bit on the rough side most likely, but that's okay. I'm not sure how much I'll need to shorten the blade by. Most likely I'll just take off 5 centimetres, see how the balance is, take off another 5 centimetres if the balance is still off, and, just take it like that. Hopefully I won't need to take off more than 20 to 25 centimetres. Ideally it would be 10 to 15 centimetres at most, but we'll just have to see. After that, I need to work on sharpening the edge, because the edge on this, well, it doesn't really exist, actually. To be honest, I think it would struggle to even cut through whipped cream. This is one of several pieces where I can confidently grip the blade tightly in my bare hand, pull the blade through, and not have to worry about sustaining any injuries. It just doesn't have the edge for that. The frosting point is not great either. It can penetrate soft matter, just not very well. So I'll also need to hone the tip as well to allow for better penetration. Please, no penetration jokes. But yeah, I would like this sword to be able to cut and thrust instead of purely thrust, not that it's much good at thrusting right now. No thrusting jokes either, please. I may work on the pommel as well, aesthetically, if not physically removing material from it. It depends upon how the weight balance is. If the balance is too far back, I'll need to slim the pommel down and reduce the weight there a bit, shifting the balance forward again to back to where I want it. Certainly I want to try and clean it up somehow, because right now this pommel looks pretty grim. It's quite dull and dirty looking and really doesn't match the clean and shiny shape and locket. Since I'm going to be moving the guard up, I'll also need to cut some notches into its shape so that the guard will fit flush in the sheath rather than having some of the blade sticking out and getting dirty or rusty. I mean, I do have oils and things to protect the blade, but it's still a good idea to keep the blade clean and of dust and other pollutants as much as possible anyway. And then last but not least is to make a new sheath. I have all the tools and most of the supplies for that. All that's left is the leather, which shouldn't be too difficult to get. I do have a line on a good leather supplier, it's just a case of getting the money together since good leather is more expensive than you might think it is. This sheath is not terrible. It did its job, to be sure, but it could have been better. The stitching was poor, though. They used cotton for that, which you're not supposed to do since the tannins in leather will rot cotton over time. You're supposed to use polyester or nylon, or a blend of the two, the latter of which I have. But this sheath didn't, and the thread ended up rotting and falling out, hence why the sheath is currently held together with tape. It's just a temporary solution. I'm going to need a new sheath though, since I'm shortening the blade, so the old sheath will be too long. Since I'm new to all of this, my work isn't going to be particularly neat or professional. It's going to be rough, it'll be uneven and misshapen, and it'll just generally look amateurish. But I don't mind that. I'm not too bothered about how it looks, especially since this is my first modification. I just want it to do what I want it to. At the end of this, hopefully, I'll have a rapier that's closer to a normal or historical weight. Ideally, I'd like to cut weight in half or thereabouts, try to get it to 1.2 kilograms, or even less than that if possible, but I think I might be asking a bit too much. If I can get it to around a D peak weight, 1.46 kilograms, that'll suffice. It might end up being a little short by rapier standards, and with a non-historical guard, but that's fine. As long as it's properly balanced and easier to control, rather than being a wrist-breaking beefcake, that's what matters most. I'd like it to be able to cut through vegetables and water bottles, or whatever else I choose to do light cutting practice with. If I could get it to cut through tatami, that'd be awesome, but ultimately I'm not too bothered by that. Besides, tatami mats can get a bit pricey as well for something you're just going to cut, especially if you do a lot of cutting practice, so the cost can quickly add up. I just want this rapier to be functional, rather than a morbidly obese decorative item that's frankly just a little too fat to safely hang on the wall. If I can manage that, then that's good news for me. It'd be quite an achievement, frankly, given that I've never done anything like this before, and since I'm only using hand tools. There are at least 26 other items that I plan to modify to varying degrees in the future. Mostly swords, specifically katana and wakizashi, but also tanto, knives, daggers, and a naginata as well that needs rehafting. If anyone is interested in hearing about these and about my progress on the rapier, let me know in the comment section below. I can see the potential to get a lot of videos made, not just on discussing the items, discussing my plans for them and my progress on them, but also videos on the results of the modifications, the cutting tests. I could easily get 50 or more videos done for this, even over 100 if there's enough interest in it. That being said, recording cutting tests could be difficult. I don't have enough space for those at home. Well, maybe I can with knives and daggers. I suppose testing wakizashi is also within the realms of possibility, but anything longer than those is no good. I have tried, and there's just not enough room for me to get a dedicated swing with proper technique. Frosting tests, on the other hand, those should be doable. I think I can make those work. Unfortunately, I don't currently know of anyone who would be willing to let me use their garden or farmland or whatever for cutting tests. There doesn't seem to be many, if any, sword fans near me, which is a shame. I have, however, located 2 potential locations for cutting videos, though the logistics of getting to these is daunting to say the least. One is at the top of a hill nearby. The beginning of the climb is rough before getting easier, though the last 20 metres in altitude are the worst. Even in dry weather, it's a sheer scramble on all fours, you can't walk up normally. At this time of year, when it's quite wet, even a scramble on all fours is dangerous, like life-threateningly dangerous. There's no shortage of large rocks on that hill, so if you fall you can break bones, you can get brain damage, you could even die. I'm not willing to risk my life for a video, so that location will have to wait for dry weather. The other location is easier to get to, not so high up, but it's still a long walk and not great in wet weather, though it does come with its own cutting stand, of sorts, but it's made of brick, so I have to watch what swings I make. The downside is that it's located right next to a public footpath. That being said, in the last 9 years I've only seen 3 people up there, and those were all in drier weather, so late autumn to early spring would probably be my best bet. Even so, both locations require a trek of about 5 kilometres, and lugging water bottles and stores across that distance with my back is not a thrilling prospect. I've spoken about my back in the past, but recently it got much worse. There was an incident in early September, and now my back is worse than ever. Doctors say it's sciatica, but the exact trigger is unknown, and they don't seem to listen to what I have to say about it. I'm currently taking codeine for the pain, and boy does that come with some fine challenges. So yeah, I wouldn't count on a cutting video anytime soon, but it might be possible. I do need to rest my back a bit though, and wait for better weather. Mostly it's the weather that's going to hold me up though, to be fair. Still, if people really want to see that sort of thing, I'll see what I can do. I will most certainly give it my best shot. And I will try to wrap it up there. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share or requests, let me know in the comments section. If I made any errors, let me know about those as well. I don't think I made any major mistakes. I can't really see how to make a major mistake with this, but any error is something I'd like to learn from. And I feel like an asshole for asking this, but if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I could really use all the support I can get. I'm going to overhaul my Patreon tiers and drop the prices to make it easier to support me, but I understand if people can't. Given current climate, pandemic, inflation and everything else, I wouldn't be surprised at all if you can't. But if you can, please consider doing so. I really need the help. Even if you can't support me on Patreon, simply liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing and all of that will all help with the YouTube algorithm, which unfortunately is famously cursed. Whatever help you can give me is greatly appreciated. If I can give up my retail job, that would free up huge amounts of time and energy for more videos, gaming or otherwise. More time and energy for sword customizations, for writing, for artwork, for animations, for the Minecraft mod I've been planning, for other game mods I'm planning as well. And it would also spare my back. Work is what has strained my back to this point in the first place, so getting out of there would allow me to recover quite a lot more quickly. At any rate, I reckon that's probably enough for this video. I'm not sure what or when the next video will be, but it's probably going to be a gaming one since those are the easiest to set up, and I've recently discovered emulator gaming, so I have a lot of ROMs and stuff I'd like to play and record videos in those, so there are a lot of options for gaming, so keep an eye out for those. In the meantime, stay safe, look after yourselves and those closest to you, try to avoid idiots if at all possible, and most importantly, don't be a dick.